There is a country where most of the people who belong to it don't actually live there. More than 1 million people on Earth call themselves Cape Verdean, but only about a third of them live in Cape Verde. The rest are scattered across America, Europe, and Africa, and there are more of them abroad than there are back home. This is a nation that survives, quite literally, by sending its own people away. Today we're going to understand how people actually live on these 10 volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic, a place with almost no fresh water, no oil, no gold, nothing the rest of the world usually calls wealth. And yet somehow it became one of the most stable, successful countries in Africa. Along the way, you'll see an island where a third of everyone alive starved to death in living memory. A volcano that people rebuild their homes on top of, even after it buries them. A style of music invented purely to cope with the pain of leaving. And a diaspora so enormous that the money it sends home keeps the entire country running. But to understand why Cape Verdeans keep leaving, you first have to understand what they're leaving behind. So let's start at the very beginning, with 10 specks of rock that, for most of history, weren't supposed to have anyone on them at all. About 570 kilometers off the coast of West Africa, roughly the distance from the tip of Senegal, a cluster of 10 islands rises straight out of the Atlantic. 9 of them are inhabited. One, Santa Lucia, is empty. Together they make up the country of Cape Verde, or as it prefers to be called today, Cabo Verde. They are volcanic islands, which means they didn't drift here or break off from a continent. They were built, eruption by eruption, out of the seafloor. From the air they look dramatic and beautiful. Jagged black peaks, dry canyons, ribbons of green folded into brown mountains. From the ground, for most of their history, they look like something much harsher, a place that was extremely difficult to survive in. Here's the fact that shapes everything else about this country. When Portuguese sailors first arrived in 1462, the islands were completely uninhabited. No indigenous people, no prior civilization, nobody. Cape Verde is one of the few nations on Earth where every single person is descended from someone who arrived by boat, because there was never anyone here to begin with, and there was a brutal reason nobody had settled these islands before. There is almost no fresh water. Cape Verde has no permanent rivers. Rain, when it comes at all, falls in just 2 months of the year, in August and September, and in many years it barely comes at all. The name Cape Verde means Green Cape, which is one of history's crueler jokes, because the islands are mostly the color of dust. So the obvious question is, if this place is so hard to live in, why did anyone stay? The answer is one of the darker chapters in Atlantic history. The Portuguese didn't settle Cape Verde because it was a paradise. They settled it because of where it sat, right in the middle of the ocean, on the sea lanes between Africa, Europe, and the Americas. These islands became one of the first great hubs of the transatlantic slave trade. On the island of Santiago, the Portuguese built a town called Ribeira Grande, today known as Sodade Velha, meaning Old City. It's often described as the first permanent European city in the tropics anywhere in the world. And for well over a century, enslaved Africans were brought here from the mainland, held, sold, and shipped onward across the Atlantic. Out of that history, a completely new people was born. Portuguese settlers, enslaved Africans, sailors, and traders mixed on these isolated islands, and their descendants became something that hadn't existed before, the Cape Verdean. They created their own language, Cape Verdean Creole, or Crioulo, which blends Portuguese with West African languages and is what most people actually speak at home to this day. They developed their own food, their own music, and a cultural value they call morabeza, a kind of warmth and hospitality that Cape Verdeans will tell you is the real national identity. So this is who lives here, a Creole nation, forged in the middle of the ocean, with roots on 3 continents and no ancestral homeland anywhere but these dry volcanic rocks, which made what happened next all the more devastating, because the land they were tied to simply could not feed them. Remember the water problem. No rivers, rain in only 2 months, and often not even that. When the rains failed, the crops failed. And when the crops failed on a cluster of remote islands with no way to import food, people starved. This wasn't a one-time tragedy. It was a rhythm that repeated for centuries. In the drought of the 1770s, more than 20,000 people died. In the 1830s, around 30,000. In the 1860s, tens of thousands more. Over and over, drought would return, and a huge share of the population would simply vanish. But the worst was still to come, and it happened recently enough that people alive today remember it. Between 1941 and 1948, 2 catastrophic famines struck Cape Verde back to back. Together they killed an estimated 45,000 people. Let that number sink in for a place this small. On the island of Fogo, roughly a third of the entire population died. On São Nicolau, more than a quarter. On Santiago, the largest island, the losses were staggering. And here's the part that turned tragedy into anger. At the time, Cape Verde was a colony of Portugal, ruled by a dictatorship that showed very little interest in a poor, drought-stricken African outpost. The colonial government failed to build the water systems that might have helped, and failed to send enough food aid when the crops died. Historians who study this period describe famines that were made far worse by neglect, people dying not only because the rain didn't fall, but because nobody in charge came to help. For Cape Verdeans, the lesson was carved in the hardest way possible. If you stayed and trusted the land might kill you. If you wanted to survive, you had to find a way off the islands. And so they did, in a way that would eventually define the entire nation. The escape route came, of all things, on whaling ships. In the 1800s, American whaling vessels out of New England were roaming the Atlantic, and they needed crew, tough, cheap labor willing to spend years at sea. They started stopping at Cape Verde, especially the small islands of Brava and Fogo, and taking on Cape Verdean men. For a young man facing drought and starvation at home, a berth on a whaling ship was a lifeline. Many never came back. They settled in the ports where the ships landed, above all New Bedford, Massachusetts, and nearby Rhode Island. This is a remarkable footnote in American history. Cape Verdeans are often described as among the first groups of Africans to immigrate to the United States by choice, rather than in chains, arriving as free workers on whaling ships in the 1800s, generations before most other African immigration to America. And they built something clever to keep the pipeline open. Cape Verdean immigrants bought their own aging ships, the famous packet boats, the Brava packets, and ran them back and forth across the Atlantic, carrying people, letters, and goods between the islands and New England. Emigration became a business, a system, a family strategy. By the early 1900s, it was in full flood, peaking between roughly 1890 and 1921. That pattern, leave to survive, then send help back, never stopped. When America tightened its immigration laws, Cape Verdeans went elsewhere, to Portugal, the Netherlands, France, Italy, Senegal, and beyond. Today, the map of the Cape Verdean people looks almost inside out. There are close to 500,000 in the United States alone. There are large communities across Europe and West Africa. And back on the islands themselves, only about 500,000 people remain. The country's biggest export has never been fish or salt or bananas, it's people. With all that history in mind, let's land on the islands and look at daily life today, because modern Cape Verde is not the starving colony of the past. It's a functioning, and in many ways impressive, country. Life depends a lot on which island you're standing on, because each one has its own personality. Santiago is the biggest and busiest, home to about half the country's entire population, and to the capital city, Praia. This is the urban Cape Verde. Government offices, markets, traffic, universities, a young population, and music pouring out of the bars at night. If you want to see where the country is headed, you look at Praia. Then there's São Vicente, and its city of Mindelo, the cultural heart of the nation. Mindelo is a port town with a European feel, famous for its carnival, its nightlife, and its music. Cape Verdeans will tell you that Praia runs the country, but Mindelo gives it its soul. Two of the islands live in a different economy entirely, Sal and Boa Vista. These are flat, sandy, and ringed with the kind of turquoise beaches that turn up on postcards. Over the last few decades, they've been transformed into tourist resorts, and international flights now bring in visitors from all over Europe. Tourism has become one of the biggest engines of the modern economy, a country with no natural riches selling the one thing it has plenty of, sunshine and coastline. Other islands are quieter and greener. Santo Antão is a hiker's dream of terraced valleys and farms clinging to steep mountainsides, where people still grow crops and distill a fierce sugarcane spirit called grog. Fogo is dominated by its volcano. São Nicolau, Maio, and tiny Brava are slower, older, more traditional Cape Verde, the island's people are most likely to have left. And the water problem? It never fully went away, but the country learned to engineer around it. Much of Cape Verde's fresh water now comes from desalination plants that turn seawater into drinking water, powered increasingly by the strong Atlantic wind and sun. It's expensive, and it's a constant challenge, but it means the famines of the past are, for now, history. Underpinning all of it is money from abroad. Remittances, the cash that Cape Verdeans overseas send back to their families, have long made up a large share of the national economy. In some years, well over 1/10 of everything the country produces. Combine that with tourism, and you get the strange, quiet success of Cape Verde, a nation with almost no resources that became one of Africa's most stable democracies, with regular, peaceful elections and, in 2007, the rare distinction of officially graduating out of the United Nations list of least developed countries. A place that got, by regional standards, genuinely well off, with essentially nothing but wind, salt, and the people it sent away. But if you want to understand the spirit of how Cape Verdeans live, there's one island that captures it better than any statistic. On the island of Fogo, the name literally means fire, a volcano called Pico do Fogo rises nearly 3,000 meters straight out of the sea. It is very much active, and in a wide crater high on its slopes, in a place called Chá das Caldeiras, people live directly on the volcano. They're not there by accident. The volcanic soil is rich, and it grows something surprising: grapes. The families of Chá das Caldeiras make wine and coffee on the slopes of an active volcano in one of the most unlikely farming communities on Earth. Then, in late 2014, the volcano erupted. For months, lava poured down into the crater. It swallowed the two main villages, Portela and Bangueira, homes, farms, the local school, the visitor center, all of it buried under molten rock. Around 1,500 people had to flee for their lives. And here's what tells you everything about this country. Within a couple of years, many of them moved back. They returned to the crater, to the exact place the lava had just destroyed, and they began rebuilding their homes and replanting their vines, some of them constructing new houses directly on top of the hardened black lava that had erased the old ones. If you want a single image for how Cape Verdeans live, it might be that: people planting grapes on the roof of a volcano that just tried to bury them. This is a nation with a very long memory of loss, and an even longer habit of refusing to be beaten by it. There's an emotion at the very center of Cape Verdean life, and it has a name: Sodade. It's their version of the Portuguese word saudade, a deep, bittersweet longing, a homesickness for someone or somewhere you've had to leave behind. And in a country where almost every family has sent people across an ocean, Sodade isn't just a word, it's the national mood. That feeling produced Cape Verde's greatest gift to the world, a style of music called morna. Slow, aching, and beautiful, morna is often compared to the blues, songs about love, the sea, exile, and the ache of leaving home. It is the sound of a people who are always saying goodbye to someone, and morna gave the world one unforgettable voice. Her name was Cesária Évora, born into poverty in the streets of Mindelo in 1941. She began singing in the bars of that port city as a teenager, and for most of her life she remained almost unknown outside the islands. Then, in her 50s, her recordings finally reached the wider world, and audiences everywhere fell in love with the raw, smoky sorrow in her voice. They called her the Barefoot Diva because she performed with no shoes on in honor of the poor women of her country. Her most famous song is called, fittingly, Sodade, a haunting lament about the long journey away from the islands. In 2004, she won a Grammy Award, and by the time she died in 2011, she had become the face of Cape Verde to the entire planet. A woman from one of the poorest corners of the Atlantic, singing about the pain of leaving, heard in concert halls all over the world. Which is, when you think about it, the whole story of Cape Verde in a single life. The country's most powerful export wasn't a product, it was a feeling, the longing of people who leave. And it turned out the world understood that feeling perfectly. So let's come back to where we started. How does a nation with almost no fresh water, no valuable resources, and a history of famine become a stable, functioning success? The answer is the very thing that sounds like a weakness: it exports its own people. Cape Verde finally won its independence from Portugal in 1975, after the dictatorship in Lisbon collapsed and a generation of local leaders pushed for freedom. And the young country made a quiet, pragmatic peace with its own geography. It couldn't feed everyone. So instead of pretending otherwise, it embraced the diaspora as a permanent part of the nation. Cape Verdeans go out into the world. They work, and they send money, ideas, and connections back home. The people who leave don't stop being Cape Verdean. If anything, distance makes them hold on tighter. That's why this is genuinely the nation that exports its own people. Not as a tragedy, though it began as one, but as a survival strategy that actually worked. A country that turned its greatest wound, the constant loss of its people to the wider world, into the engine that keeps it alive. It's a strange kind of nationhood when you really sit with it. Cape Verde is a country that mostly exists outside its own borders, held together not by land, because the land could never hold them, but by memory, music, and money crossing the ocean in both directions. The islands send their children away so that the family back home can survive, and the children spend their whole lives carrying Sodade for a homeland many of them have barely seen. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If 2/3 of a nation lives somewhere else, where does the nation actually exist? In the islands, or in the hearts of the people who left them? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this one, there's a whole world of impossible places, forgotten histories, and strange corners of the map waiting for you on the channel. So subscribe, and I'll see you on the next journey.